Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you. This is KRWG, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Next on Newsmakers, there are high school Republican clubs throughout the state of Texas. And we'll meet an El Paso high school student who's involved with the club at his school. Plus, the Dona Ana County Clerk's Office registers young people to vote at area high schools. And in Focus, we'll talk about that and much more with County Clerk Scott Krahling. Thanks for joining us on Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. Hillary Clinton's campaign courted Hispanics this year, hoping that Donald Trump's remarks about Mexicans and immigration would help her win the presidency. Exit polls showed Clinton secured about 70% of the Hispanic vote, about the same as President Obama in 2012. Some say Clinton did better with Hispanics than those exit polls indicate. But one thing is for sure, even in areas like ours where Clinton won big, the GOP is courting Hispanics, even before they can vote. Simon Thompson explains.
For many, high school is difficult in the best of times. Fitting in and making new friends, well, imagine all of that with the added responsibility of recruiting classmates into the GOP. Christian Sanamiego is the president of the High School Republican Club in El Paso, and he says it's tough.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we always get people, especially in high school. You know, there's always people that are gonna give you a mad face just for the fact that you're Republican. They might not even hear anything that you have to say, and they just prejudge you by your party.
There are Republican clubs in high schools all over Texas, but Sanamiego says recruiting is that much harder in El Paso, one of the state's biggest Democratic Party strongholds. You know,
honestly, it's very, very, very tough. You know, millennials tend to, be towards the blue side a lot. And, it's a challenge that we face currently right now as I'm speaking, trying to recruit new high school students. A lot of them tend to, be more liberal in a sense of way.
Straddling the US-Mexico border, El Paso County is 82% Hispanic, one of the highest percentages in the state. Sanamiego says presidential candidate Donald Trump's statements on Mexicans and immigration has made his club tough sell to El Paso students.
They always identify Republicans, racist, whatnot.
Sanamiego only started the 10-member strong club in recent months. He says shared religious values are probably key to the party's appeal in the region. According to bestplaces.net, more than 57% of people living in El Paso County identify as Christians.
The reason why it would appeal to other people is if you have the same, values. And I do definitely agree that there's people that have the same core values as us, and I think we do share something in common.
Sanamiego says his club is working to change young people's impressions of the party and planting seeds for future supporters. As Sanamiego notes, religious and conservative values often get stronger with age.
Maybe when they settled in, have their own family, they really think about their kids and their future. I really think that's when they start realizing or maturing. Like someone would say, just focusing on, your kid's future, start thinking about, I think as you become older, you become more concerned about your community.
Sanamiego says he'd like to see the Republican Party do more youth outreach and work harder on changing its image. Until then, he's keeping up the fight.
It is a struggle, but I think we could absolutely get, the people that we want to and, strive on. And being El Paso liberal city, I think we could still succeed no matter what. And as long as we keep, going for that goal to get more people, I think we could actually, achieve it.
For KRWG, I'm Simon Thompson.
In Dona Ana County, there's a major effort to register new voters. Some disclosure, I am a member of the county's Election Advisory Committee, and I was one of the people who visited area schools this fall to encourage young people to register to vote. Samantha Sonner reports on the outreach effort by the county clerk's office.
The clerk's office has registered over 1,000 voters through various voter outreach programs. registering more than 400 at local high schools. Andrew Montoya, an Enlace teacher at Centennial High School, helped to organize a voter registration drive for National Voter Registration Day. He says registering students is an important teachable moment.
The class I teach that stands for Engaging Latino Communities for Education. Any chance the underrepresented youth of our community gets a chance to use their voice, I want my students there. So in this case, students' voice is their ability to vote. So why not use that as a teachable moment and encourage them to not only register, but to also vote in the future.
Students registering at Centennial said it was important to make their voices heard.
I thought it would be a good idea since I'm old enough and since this town, I believe New Mexico is one of the few places where you can vote if you're going to turn 18 before the election. And I thought, I might as well participate and be an active person in my government.
I think it's very important to register to vote, especially as a student. Some people say it's not important, but it is important. And it makes a difference actually.
I decided to register to vote because I think it's a good experience and a good opportunity. I mean, I won't get another chance till another 4 years, so see how it goes.
Andrew Montoya says hopefully by teaching the importance of voting in schools, students will continue to vote for years to come.
Because I believe in what this country stands for and was founded on. I believe in democracy 100%. I actually teach principles of democracy here at Centennial High School as well. And one of the things that I firmly believe is if we fail to use our voice, we'll fail to represent what this country stands for.
Montoya says he hopes students can start learning about the importance of voting as early as elementary school. For KRWG, I'm Samantha Sonner.
In Focus today, we are talking about the importance of voting and increasing voter registration and turnout. And I'm very pleased to have with us the new Dona Ana County clerk, Scott Krahling. Scott, it is good to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Let's start with voter registration. I mentioned earlier in the show that I am part of an election advisory committee working with you and with the county clerk's office and a number of other volunteers to try to increase registration in our county.
Yeah, the idea came to me when I got to the clerk's office. I thought about how complicated this project is. I mean, there's hundreds of moving pieces to an election, and we have great staff that is well trained and prepared to administer an election and make sure that all the pieces move. But there's so much more than just administering the election. We have to get out into the community and register voters. We need to inform them. We need to encourage them to make a plan, and then ultimately we have to get them to get out and vote. And those pieces don't really fit nice and neat into our office as easily as administering the election and making sure that there are poll workers at the locations, that there are supplies, and that everything kind of goes off the way that it's supposed to be. And so I took an experience that I had in the private world. I was in marketing before I got involved in government, and I worked at the Home Builders Association. I was a volunteer with the Home Builders Association for their showcase of homes. And I was on their committee for, 4 or 5 years. And it's a group of volunteers that get together and they help the Home Builders Association implement this huge project. And during that time, there were like 60, 70 homes that would show up, and you got to put signs up, you got to do all these things. And I just thought that there was some value there to the idea of bringing together community partners to help us with all the pieces of the election process that our office can't necessarily do from being in the office.
As you hinted in your answer, getting people registered to vote is one thing. Getting them out there on election day, or in the case of New Mexico during early voting, is another. And you're aware of this. The preliminary numbers are not good if you believe that we ought to have just about everyone voting. In the most recent election, only about 59% of the voting age population cast ballots nationally. I was surprised to see that even in a really good year, what was talked about as a good year, 2008, when then Senator Obama had an amazing grassroots campaign, only about 62% of the voting age population cast ballots. What do you make of this, and why is this happening, and how do we change it?
I think a big part of it is that throughout the country, we rely on campaigns to drive people to vote. Election administrators, clerks' offices in New Mexico, or really throughout the country, our job, we've seen our job traditionally is the administrators of the election. We're there to make sure that all the pieces are in place and that there aren't any problems for the voters. And there's really nobody else except for the campaigns out there talking to people about why voting is so important. We almost just assume that it's happening. We assume that people are getting the education in high school. We assume that they're paying attention, and I think when we leave it to just the campaigns, we end up with different agendas. And I think we see it in the presidential election this last year. I mean, the agendas aren't necessarily always to encourage people to get out and vote and to believe in the process. And so I think that we need a more organized approach to reminding people why voting is important, and making sure that they have good and accurate information about the election process in general, and then ultimately, a good unbiased approach to getting them out to vote, making sure that they have a plan and helping them execute that plan.
Well, as you know, we were really excited early on before the election in Dona Ana County because we had a big jump in early voting. Why do you think the overall voting increase didn't match the increase that we had in the early vote?
So something that I think is interesting. You mentioned the statistics in your last question about the national numbers. One of the challenges that we have is getting good information and comparing apples to apples when we're talking about turnout. Sorry to go back real quick, but nationally, that may have been the percentage of voting age population. Here in Dona Ana County, in 2008, 61% of those that were registered voted. And believe it or not, this year, 64% of those who were registered voted. And so Dona Ana County's numbers didn't necessarily follow the national trend. And I don't, I could speculate on a lot of different reasons why that might be the case, but I think that part of it is the fact that we are being aggressive in getting out into the community and talking to people about why voting matters.
So it was a slight increase, a couple points.
Yeah,
but
early
voting, at one point, it was like 10 points.
Oh, right. So early voting was huge. We had 10% more vote early this year than in the past. And I think that part of that is that we're getting good information out to the community. Mm-hmm. We had through the advisory council, we implemented a lot of great ideas to make sure that there's good, accurate information in voters' hands. And I think that we saw that pay off. People are learning and becoming more aware of all the different options that they have and all the different access opportunities there are to vote. And that ultimately, in the big picture, it's not election day anymore. We're kind of trained to think of elections as election day. And I really like to talk about it more as a season. This is election season. We've got 28 days of voting. And I think that we were successful in getting that information out into the community, and people like it because it's more convenient. It's easier. There aren't lines. You can do it at your own time. You can plan better around it. And so I think that the overall 64% turnout is, while not as high as I'd like it to be, it's a good number. I'm glad that we beat the national average.
But as you point out, that's 64% of registered voters. Okay.
Correct, as opposed to the voting age population, which could really be anybody that's not registered.
Right. Okay.
But our election day number, while our election day number wasn't quite as big, it was still a big number in and of itself. We just had such a huge increase in early voting that if it had matched, we would have been 70+% turnout, which was a great goal, and I don't have a problem setting that as our goal, if not higher. But maybe not necessarily realistic for this year's election.
Yeah. Now you know this, Scott. Some speculate that FBI Director James Comey's announcement about the discovery of Clinton emails on one of Anthony Weiner's computers may have depressed turnout. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that there's a difference between campaigns and elections. And campaigns have agendas. And those agendas aren't always necessarily, let's increase turnout, let's increase turnout, let's get everybody to vote. Mm-hmm. As election administrators, I think our agenda ought to be to convince people that they ought to be participating in every election. Vote in every election that we have, especially these local elections where you have direct access to the people that you're electing, and they are making decisions on policies that have a direct impact on your life. And so, I think that whenever I look at sensational stories like that, I think I think that there's an agenda there, and that they aren't always necessarily lined up with what I see as the most important.
Are you concerned that this is sort of unresolved? The idea that, you know, you could have a government official say, you know, we found something, don't know what it is, but just wanted to let you know, since you're voting right now, that hey, that we found something, and we may get to it before the election day, we may not. I mean, that concerns a lot of people.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'll leave it to people above my pay grade to speculate on whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing for the director of the FBI to do just in the days leading up to the election. I think that it's a fair assessment of the situation to say that it had a negative impact, that it did discourage people from voting. And I think that anything that tries to discourage people from voting isn't in line with what I think should be our agendas. And so, yeah, it's concerning. Was it the right thing to do? You know, I don't have all the information. I'm not the expert, the FBI director. Gosh, we sure would hope that the FBI director wouldn't be trying to do something that would undermine the election ultimately.
Okay. You note that, you know, regardless of who is running for president, and we only have a presidential election normally every 4 years, this has been unusual. Who knows? Maybe it'll be sooner. People need to pay attention to local elections. We have some great recent data about this because we've had state races and city council races that were really decided by a handful of votes.
Yeah, school board elections as well.
Yeah.
And you know, we have this, as you know, we have the school board election coming up on in
February.
In
right?
February,
Mm-hmm.
and early voting for that starts the January 13th. So we're excited about that. But you know, I just think that while yes, the presidential election is important, these local elections are just as important. You're electing people to go and make decisions that directly impact your life on a daily basis. We were at the Mayfield High School earlier this week with Mr. Morales' enlace class, and you know, those students care about school, and they care, and the teachers care about schools, and I care about schools. My kids are in schools. My parents, you know, who don't have kids in schools, they got grandkids that are in schools, and you know, the school board is making very important decisions that affect all of our lives, and you know, city council makes decisions that affect our daily lives, and I think it's unfortunate that at least the existing circumstances are that we get so many people that pay attention to the presidential election and so few people that pay attention to these local elections that are here on the ground. I mean, these are the people that you can pick up the phone and you can call, and they will come to your house and they will help you with whatever it is you need, whether they can actually make a difference or they can just connect you with the person that can make a difference. These are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are people that can help us. And I think more people ought to be voting in all these elections. In fact, I think everyone ought to vote in every election. And so that's part of my goals as county clerk, is to get that message out there and make sure people have accurate information so they can make a good plan and be aware of all of the information that they need to vote in these local elections. And I could go on, and I'll stop so you can go to your next question.
Well, as you know, in February we have a school election coming up in Las Cruces. I know that there have been efforts to consolidate elections, in part because turnout for school elections is usually terrible. I mean, less than 10%.
Right, yeah, definitely less than 10%. And you know, I mean, I think that part of the problem is that we have elections in New Mexico that are kind of scattered around. Mm-hmm. We've got over 30 different types of special districts that can tax us, who have their own election laws. And so the consolidation effort, I think, is a good effort. I think that maybe some of your viewers or you may remember that, you know, the Dona Ana Soil and Water Conservation District has had an election in the last 4 years. It had really big turnout, and they didn't have to come to us for help, but they did come to us, and we tried to provide them with the resources that we could to give voters access to voting. But their rules they're out of date, and we didn't have the ability to do things like early voting. And so turnout was really large on election day, and people had to wait in line for almost an hour in some cases, maybe even more. So consolidation is all about really lining up all these different districts and all these different types of elections under one set of rules, so that people know what to expect, and they know that they can vote early, they know they can vote by mail, they know when election day is. And so we've got a unique set of rules, the same set of rules for all of these districts. consolidate them all into a November election that happens the opposite year of a general election. So we're not talking about consolidating special district elections or school board elections or municipal elections into a general election. Rather, it's the November of the
when we have municipal elections.
Odd number elections,
sure.
right? Odd numbered
Okay.
years, and so I think that would make it easier for voters to understand and expect, to know what to expect. And yes, I think that turnout would increase. But to me, it's bigger than that. It's also about efficient use of resources, making sure that voters have access, making sure there's a consistent set of laws, and also making sure that the people who are responsible for it are election administrators and not just boards.
Okay. Let's talk about voter fraud. Widespread studies show this is almost unheard of, but Donald Trump raised questions when he alleged with no proof that millions of people illegally voted in 2016.
One of my goals as county clerk is to make sure that there's good, accurate information out in the community. That's why, part of the reason why we put together the advisory council is to build community partnerships to help us get that information out. And I think this is one of those subjects that we do need to reach out into the community and make sure that that people know what the real situation is. There's hundreds of moving pieces to an election, and there's no such thing as a perfect election, because when you have so many people involved in it, we hire 250 people on election day to administer an election. They work one day every 2 years. So there's no such thing as a perfect election. So anytime that there's one little piece that doesn't look right, we've got campaigns, and campaigns have different agendas who try to take advantage of that and make it seem as though there's something suspicious going on. And so, yeah, I think that the Department of Justice did a study and found that out of 1 billion votes, there was 31 actual instances of voter fraud. That somebody is more likely to be struck by lightning than actually impersonate a voter.
Yeah.
The truth is that these things don't happen.
And if there's an allegation of trouble in New Mexico, by and large, just about every vote you have a paper backup, right?
Right, and that's actually great. New Mexico is one of the best states in the nation as far as our election laws are concerned. Paper ballots are, I think, are the best practice, because we've got a backup and we can always go back and count the paper if something goes wrong with the machines. And so, yeah, New Mexico's got great laws when it comes to access, early voting, voting by mail. And I think what we tend to see when it comes to voter fraud or accusations of voter fraud is there's an actual situation where something went wrong and somebody tries to take advantage of it. For instance, in 2014, in a northern county, there was somebody that showed up to vote. When he got there, he had already been flagged as having voted, and he was justifiably upset about it. He contacted the Secretary of State's office. One of the campaigns got wind of it. They swung into the community. They held a press conference saying voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud. Well, come to find out, there were 10 versions of this person in the voter registration database. Not exactly him, the 10 versions of the name. It was a poll worker error. What they did is they checked in the wrong person. And so, rather than getting good, accurate information out into the community about what happened, we had campaigns jump on it and take advantage of it, and all of a sudden put doubt into people's minds. And just like the FBI story or accusations of voter fraud, all these things really do is have a negative effect on people's attitudes towards voting, because they just don't think that their vote's going to count. Yeah. And the exact opposite is the truth. Their vote will count. In fact, the voting booth is the only place where my vote counts as much as yours.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much money I make a year. It doesn't matter what my background was or what race I am. My vote counts just as much as yours.
Okay. Some have expressed fears that efforts will continue to try to make it harder for people to vote in some states in order to depress turnout, an intentional effort by some politicians. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think there are people out there that don't believe in democracy. They don't believe that your opinion is as valuable as my opinion. And voting is a powerful act. In fact, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now about voting being as powerful as it is if that wasn't the fact. And so, I think that I've heard people talk about the fact that they don't want everyone voting in every election. Well, I'm of the belief that everybody has value. and that no matter what your background is, no matter what your existing circumstances are with your life, you have something valuable to contribute to the conversation about what the policies are that our local officials are enacting, about what the future of our community is going to look like, and ultimately these are the ideals that our country was founded on. The idea that everybody has value and everyone ought to have the ability to participate in the process that determines their future.
Okay. Besides early voting, which a lot of people are really happy, including myself, that we have in New Mexico, and the recently implemented online registration that we also have here, what would you like to see in New Mexico to improve voter access?
There's a couple of things that I think will be addressed this year. I don't know that they'll pass the legislature, but you mentioned election consolidation,
right?
Reducing all of the different little elections that we have throughout the year, putting them all into one community election in a odd-numbered November. That's one big improvement that we can make. But then there's even little improvements. In New Mexico election law, your employer has to give you 2 hours off on election day to go vote. Well, it's an election season. There's 28 days of voting. Why not extend that? Why not make it 2 hours during the season? You have 2 hours the entire 28 days. It doesn't have to be on election day. Maybe that will make it more accessible to folks that just are busy. I
bet there's a lot of people who didn't even know about the New Mexico law that you just mentioned.
Well,
2 hours.
And that's one of the challenges. That's why I think that it's important that the clerk's office adjust its mission and its goals. I mean, we aren't just the people that administer the law. We aren't just those that make sure that the rules are followed. Although that's extremely important, and I think over the last 8 years, my predecessor, Lynn Ellens, who's my chief deputy now, did a great job of training our staff and getting them prepared to do that. But there's a bigger piece, and that is, if we have an election, if we have it by all the rules and 2 people show up to vote, I don't think that anybody would agree that that was a successful election. Well, the clerk's office shouldn't either. We need to make sure that we're getting good information out there. And so really, it's a 3-step process. Get you registered to vote, help you make sure that you have good information so that you can create a plan to vote, and then show up and vote. And all 3 of those pieces are important to me and our staff and all of the plans that we're putting together for the next 4 years.
Have about a minute left. Biggest challenges you see down the line for yourself and other county clerks?
Well, our biggest challenge is getting accurate information into the community. And so that's why we're creating community partnerships and sharing good information. That's why the advisory council is important. That's why our initiatives with the public school districts is important, that we can get young people informed on why voting is important and get them involved and familiarized with the process as young as possible. And so I think it really comes down to information. I mean, like I said, the 3-step process: registering, getting people to make a plan, and that involves getting good information and knowing what's going on. That's at least the challenge that I'm looking forward to tackling.
Well, thanks for sharing some of that information with our viewers, Scott.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition, 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.